So, we're doing what we can to ensure that the timing on paper matches reality.
Okay, that's great to hear, Kelly. Like I said, I'm guessing that many of these things have been thought about, but for us that haven't been tracking along with the IRST's meetings and the gory details, as you mentioned, Kelly, it's good to know that folks are looking at that. I'm sure with AMPC we'll look at that more as these things get fleshed out as well. But you can imagine representing operators, we're always thinking about field season and seasonality of work and what happens when. So appreciate it.
Absolutely. And just any kind of questions like that, please, we may not have thought about it. So it's hugely valuable to have those questions brought forward. So thanks.
Okay. Move on to so we started to do some thinking about the finances, given that possible rescission of the research budget, and we're thinking it's there's a few different options here. As I mentioned, the Eastern Oregon mass wasting project was only budgeted about 80,000, so that's not a something that will be a problem to fund in this biennium. So we can potentially move ahead with that. I mentioned also the road stream connectivity pre-survey work that also was budgeted at around 80,000, that we think would not be a problem then to fund in this biennium with the research funds we already have for the actually coming from the past biennium. Once we get into the field survey components for roads, that's where things get expensive. These are just very rough numbers at this point, just taking the total roads and dividing it by quarter. We're not sure what the actual expenditure rate might be at this point, but this would be kind of, we figure out on the higher conservative end. So there's a couple options there. We could either do the field survey to kind of contain costs a bit. We could just focus it on one stratum. That is, remember, we had at least 4 kind of primary strata identified. Those were east side, west side, and large landowner, small landowner. So one way to kind of contain costs, but if we need to, but get the survey underway, would be just to focus on one of those strata. The alternative is to just go do all the strata at once, kind of the original plan there. And that might be considerably more expensive, although again, we're not entirely sure how much field work could be mobilized at any during any quarter. So, potentially the contractor simply couldn't mobilize that amount of field work at the same time, so the cost may not be as high. We'll see once we get the RFP out there. Amphibians is the other one, of course. We don't anticipate, again, getting any RFP out there really before the next biennium. So we're hoping that if we, even if funds get taken from this biennium, there'd be some additional funding for the 27 to 29 biennium that would then accommodate the amphibians work. But this is all pretty rough at this point. We've just started on this, trying to think this through. And to some extent, when our co-chairs met last, we thought, well, we might as well wait until March to hear, what the actual budget situation is before doing too much work, kind of too much work to address potential cuts that we're not sure about yet. But I'll just pause for a second there in case folks have any comments or questions about kind of the expenditure timeline. Yes, I see a hand from Josh.
Yeah, thanks for the breakdown, Sean. So yeah, I guess this maybe it's a question for Seth and Stacy and the other authors, but I wonder if the legislature is having it impressed upon them, like the importance of adequately funding this for the HCP to be valid. I'm thinking about the fact what's on deck for the AMC this year is to look at effectiveness monitoring, and that's a requirement of an HCP. And also, frankly, something we need on the Clean Water Act side as well. And so, and then you're looking at ways to make the current projects in the pipeline more cost effective. And I mean, I trust you, and I assume you're looking at like that we need cost effectiveness, but we also need large enough sample size and distributed enough sampling to I don't know how you explain to a legislative committee about type 2 error. But monitoring doesn't do much good if it's so sparse on the ground that you couldn't you couldn't find something right under your nose, and you end up with an elevated chance of false negatives, right? It's easy to set the false positive rate in a statistical analysis. False negatives just tends to float, and it doesn't necessarily get thought, but I think about it all the time. So is there, as you're looking at this, are you working into it directly? Kind of what's the point at which it doesn't even make sense to do the project, because you're not going to be able to detect what it is you're supposed to be looking for?
Yeah, that was a real challenge with the Washington roads monitoring. And they did some preliminary survey work and quantified the uncertainty levels there. And it took quite a few survey points to get to their 80% chance of detecting a certain change in the road connectivity. So that is a big issue. It is likely to require a lot of survey points to get that level of certainty. We're hoping, part of that pre-survey work that we outlined in the scoping proposal could help address that, so we could better understand what the uncertainty levels are, kind of what the variability is in the road connectivity out there on different landscapes. So yeah, that's a big issue for us. It's a real challenge, and I guess that's all I can say at this point.
So I'll chime in, Josh. Amen. We totally agree. Stacy and I have talked a lot about this, and the authors have talked a lot about this. Those that are working on putting the HCP together, that small group, which also includes Kelly and some others. There's been a lot of discussion about this, and we need to. We are going into this short session very much with the goal of educating legislators and the governor's office, who's also the ones that have put these cuts out there, and prioritize this as a thing to cut, unfortunately. And so we're meeting next week. Stacy and I are meeting with the governor's office along with a small group of the authors. This will be the primary thing that we talk about, the importance of funding, especially the adaptive management program, and not only not seeing any more cuts, but ultimately it would be great if we saw the support to bring it back to the funding that it was originally planned for. And so, and we're meeting with legislators next week as well. There will be a lot of conversation about this. So to the extent that DEQ could work that into your talking points at times, the importance of the adaptive management program at that and the PFA, that'd be great. Stacy.
Yeah, you covered most of that, Seth. Just wanted to echo and reassure folks on this call that there's very active strategy wearing our other non-AMC hats with governor's office and the legislature. And we're sort of wanted to have this conversation talking with Jessica and Kelly as well in preparation for sort of the worst case scenario if that full 3 million is cut. I don't know if folks have dug into those proposed reductions, but there are different levels, so it may not be all of that 3 million. We're just trying to be prepared if we're in that situation, so that we have a plan. Hopefully we're not there, but you know, that's sort of the point of this, and we're doing everything we can to avoid that. And like Seth said, to keep making the case for continuous funding of this as part of, you know, the core operations of this whole process in HCP.
Josh.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So thanks. That's good. I figured that was the case. It's nice to hear. So yeah, you know, we're kind of talking about you know, on the Clean Water Act side, ODF's role as DMA. And, you know, even though it wasn't meant as a Clean Water Act assurances plan, you know, obviously this HCP based massive upgrade to the Forest Practices Act goes a long way towards, you know, TMDL implementation in particular. And so, and I know the forest industry has a desire to have like, no, the TMDL implementation plan is the HCP, even though it's, you know, not explicitly a Clean Water Act assurances plan. And then looking forward at effectiveness monitoring, right? We're talking about the same parameters for the HCP as far as water quality as the parameters that have developed or are developing TMDLs for, you know, suspended embedded sediment and temperature primarily. And then, you know, I'll leave the habitat side more to ODFW. So, you know, I'm sitting here thinking, well, as we're developing effectiveness monitoring, we want to develop it in a way that it's hitting both the Clean Water Act and the ESA side of effectiveness monitoring, you know, again, given that it's the same parameters. But if we don't have money to do it, then we're kind of failing to meet that monitoring need. That from an efficiency standpoint, doing one monitoring program that hits two major state programs and two major federal laws, that's pretty great, and that's an important, you know, thing to be able to look at. So long story short, if there's anything, you know, I can do in particular, please, Seth, Stacy, whomever, let me know. And then it's also something I've raised with management at DEQ, but I will try to get it on the Water Quality Division Administrator's radar so she can bump it up as we're going into talking to the legislature, you know, focusing on that sort of dual purpose thing that we can cover with the monitoring, you know, both clean water and as well as, you know, species protection and recovery. So thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great, Josh. Maybe I'll reach out to you separately and we can, you know, at times it might be useful to be coordinated with your legislative person there at DEQ to maybe even fold them into some of the visits that we do so that they can make some of those points. Terry.
Just a few other points. So the one hearing that I watched, I believe it was November or early December it was a subcommittee on natural resources, and there were several legislators who were very aware of the importance of funding the HCP and especially adaptive management program, and spoke to that. Rep Owens, and there's a woman that I'm blanking on her name, that were very sharp and were not supportive of the cuts. And so there's at least several legislators that are quite aware of what's going on. I guess the second point I'd like to make, which hopefully I'm not jumping the gun here, Sean, but the IRST has been thinking through, as evidenced in that in the spreadsheet that Sean was just showing. IRST has been thinking through systematically, okay, if we get a budget cut of a different level, what are the different options for moving forward with both roads and amphibians? And if there's a budget cut, then we'll talk about that in a structured way, using information the IRST has thought through and some options they're putting together at the March meeting. So yes, IRST is not going to move forward with doing lousy science, and AMPC will have a chance to weigh in on, all right, if there's limited funds, we want to go this way or that way. So just to say that in summary, and hopefully, I don't know if you had more to say along those lines, Sean, or other IRST folks.
No, I think that's the idea. And that was also the end of my slides. So
okay, great.
Go to discussion.
That is useful, Sean. All those slides were very helpful. Thank you for, and I do think that kind of to Stacy's point. I mean, this is sort of in some instances, in some cases, worst case scenario planning. And hopefully we don't get to that, right? But we do need, it does behoove us to think through it in case, because those proposals are out there, right? And so we do need to do our due diligence in thinking about how do we use the funds if they are cut to that level. And fingers crossed they will not be cut to that level. But we got to do the work. Julie and then Wendy.
Sorry, I didn't realize my hand was still raised, but I'm gonna reach out to our legislative team too and plug them into others here just so that we can coordinate efforts.
Thank you. Wendy.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the Board of Forestry as we've been talking about these issues from the view of the Gantt chart onward, and the impressive progress that's been made here in terms of project management. And again, this has to do with various roles and the formalities of what they can do. But I thought that, first of all, the presentation showed a really good use of resources. And since in the last Board of Forestry meeting I was at, I felt like the Board of Forestry members didn't necessarily understand some of the directives this committee and the IRST are acting under and why we're doing what we're doing. And so I feel like, to a certain extent, you're probably already communicating with them about how we are effectively deploying the resources and using the money well. They could be maybe an advocate for this, or at least internally be more supportive than they seem to be in that September Board of Forestry meeting. So after saying all that, the reason I raised my hand was just to say, probably the Board of Forestry can't really be an advocate for this, but the extent to which they're fully aware of how important this is, what's mandated, and how we're implementing it could be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. It's a good point. And we haven't put the presentation together yet, but it is statutorily required that we give an update to the board, and that will, as Terry mentioned as we kicked off here, that'll happen at the March Board of Forestry meeting. So that'll be another opportunity to do exactly what you're saying, Wendy. I wanna be clear, and I think Terry, you hit on it. I've not talked to I don't think there are any single legislators that are like crusading against the PFA or against the funding for the adaptive management program. I don't think that's happening. So rest assured there is wide support. Every one of the meetings that I've been in, and I think Stacy could probably say the same, all you get is head nods with support for what we're trying to do, what this committee is about with the adaptive management, and then what the broader PFA goals are. And so really it's sort of, at this point, I think that the issue is a little bit of a disconnect with regards to when funding is needed and when that HCP will be awarded. There's folks that think that all the funding doesn't need to be fully in place until the HCP is awarded. And we've been trying to educate that that's not fully the case. But I don't know if that message is fully internalized by everyone at this point. So that's some of the struggle. And without getting into more details about, who is sort of leading that from our perspectives, that I think is the issue. It's not that there's not support for this work. That and the fact that we are in some constrained times. I mean, that's the reality. Unfortunately, the economy has not been what we would all hope for. But it's also not. Currently, I don't think it's trending as badly as people had feared a few months ago. So hopefully, the new forecast is a little bit sunnier, and we will not have to realize this level of cut. With that, Terry, is this now where we transition into the discussion about prioritizing the Eastern Oregon slopes and the roads piece?
Yeah. Let me share this one slide that has information on the funding. And so can everyone see that now?
Yep.
So here's the budget situation. Specifically, we have about just over $3 million from the previous biennium that is currently at INR to be spent on research. We were allocated $3,080,000 for this biennium, but again, as you mentioned a moment ago, this is considered under consideration for being cut. And so we're going to have somewhere between $3 and $6 million this biennium. So that's the money situation, and March 9th is the end of the legislative session. So we'll know by then whether or not this $3,080,000 or some portion of it remain or is cut. In terms of the research agenda approved by the board, this table here shows what the board approved as presented in the research agenda. And so there's 2.7 million appropriated, $2.7 million that's available to be spent on road stream hydrologic connectivity this biennium, and a total project of 5.4 million. And then the Eastern Oregon steep slopes is a total of 80,000. So when this went to the board as the research agenda, the AMPC said, we want the research agenda to prioritize the road stream hydrologic connectivity work, get that going. It's a longer project. Let's get that going. With Eastern Oregon slopes, steep slopes being the second priority. Now the steep slopes, there's money to do the full thing, regardless if we have 3 million or 6 million or somewhere in between. The road stream hydrologic connectivity is a little more iffy in the sense that there's amphibians that's on the docket in the relatively near term. So there's some decisions that might need to be made about how much money to put where for roads and for amphibians. And given that the East Oregon steep slopes, all the money is there to do the whole project. People were conversing, and IRC was wondering maybe they could start on that one, get the RFP out soon. Maybe it's end of February, maybe it's in March, but really to get that moving soon. Whereas if they try and stick with road stream hydrologic connectivity being the first one, they're going to have to wait till the decision is made by the legislature and then a subsequent decision made by the APC. And so that could push that one out quite a ways. And so really the desire is, can we, meaning the AMPC, reprioritize which is the first RFP to go out the door? And it's in rule that the AMPC sets the research agenda, meaning including the priorities. And so that's really the decision before the AMPC. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Terry.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Terry, for that. I think it's fairly straightforward. Are there any concerns with that folks have for discussion before we take the temperature of the group and take a vote? And again, to be clear, what this is a proposal to swap and put Eastern Oregon steep slopes as the priority, slightly ahead of road stream connectivity, so that that RFP can start soon without any question. And then we'll the other one will continue to move forward with roads, but we'll with an eye to the budget and what's happening in the legislature. But we don't have to worry about that with steep slopes. So if we can just start that one, then we get moving on something sooner rather than later. Any concerns or discussion to be had on that? Not seeing any hands. Seems pretty straightforward to me. So do we have a motion?
Also move. This is Julie Furman.
This is Dave,
All right.
I second.
All right, thanks, Dave. Julie?
And I've got a draft.
Okay, go ahead and
motion
pull
you
up the
can share.
draft. Does that match what you meant to move? Seems pretty straightforward. Yep. And Dave, still second that? All right, thumb up. Any discussion? All right, go ahead and call the question, Terry.
Okay, so I'm going to call the roll call here. Please respond with yes or no. Seth Barnes,
Yes.
David Bugney,
Yes.
Stacy Detweiler,
Yes.
Julie Furman,
Yes.
Wendy Gerlach,
Yes.
Haley Ohms,
Yes.
Jason Robeson. I believe he might be out.
Yep.
Josh Seeds,
Yes.
Amanda Sullivan Astor,
Yes.
and William Tucker.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion passes 9 approved, 1 absent.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Hopefully that clears the runway for that one to take off, and then we can, in the meantime, we'll keep an eye on the legislature, and hopefully everything around the roads piece will be able to continue to move forward as well.
Yep. Okay, now for the final item on the agenda, I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Weichel with our HCP team to give a brief presentation on the biological goals and objectives in Chapter 6 as it relates to the theft management program. The floor is yours, Jennifer.
Thanks, Terry. Before I share my slides, I just want to say thank you guys for having me. As Terry mentioned, I'm the coordinator for the HCP for Department of Forestry. And just to remind everybody, we submitted the latest draft of the HCP to the services in December, at the end of the calendar year, and it's currently in their hands for review. And we're waiting patiently to hear what they have to say. So it's still a work in progress. Just want to remind you, and then I believe everybody on the committee was already sent the document that includes a portion of the HCP. We released that for your work. It's particularly important to help inform the effectiveness monitoring work that you guys are about ready to embark on. So we wanted to get that in your hands. So let me share my screen. That's not what I want. Hold on here, sorry. Okay. And slideshow. Okay, can you guys see my slideshow?
Yes.
Looks good, Terry. Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, so what I wanted to talk about today is, so there's going to be 2 times I'm going to be speaking to your committee now, and then also in April at the joint meeting, we're going to have a more substantial opportunity for conversation. But that document was sent to you kind of without context, because you're getting basically a subset of the HCP without the rest of it around it. So I just wanted to share a little bit of the framework and background for what's in front of you for those 2 pieces. And then this is going to be pretty short. I only have like 4 slides, just kind of go over the framework and kind of explain how the pieces fit together. And so if you guys don't mind, I'll run through those 4 slides, and then we can have, well, plenty of time for Q&A, and we can go back to the slides, or I can pull up the actual document that was shared if we want to deep dive into anything. Okay, so first of all, the first part of that document is the actual biological goals and objectives for the HCP. And just wanted to remind everybody that really what these biological goals and objectives are is they're essentially describing in a more detailed systematic fashion what is the purpose of our HCP. So what is the vision and the intent of the Private Forest Accord changes, as expressed through the HCP lens. There are 2 goals. So basically there's 3 parts to this. There's goals, there are objectives, and then there are sub-objectives, and they tier down in detail. There's 2 goals, one for Western Oregon and one for Eastern Oregon. And just to kind of summarize, what you see on the screen here is the one for Western Oregon. But this is the high level overarching point of the PFA and the Habitat Conservation Plan. And essentially it's to support persistence and recovery of the covered species by providing cool, clean, and connected and complex habitats for them. So in addition to the goals, there are 7 primary objectives for Western Oregon, and there's 7 primary objectives for Eastern Oregon. And these provide a little bit of a greater detail for what it kind of tiers down into more detail for what the purpose is. And I'm not going to go through all of them. Like I said, we can pull up the document if needed, but the one shown on your screen is objective 1 for Western Oregon. And essentially it's to minimize sediment delivery to support the needs of the covered species. And so everything in that objective 1 is about minimizing sediment delivery. And then where it gets down to the nitty gritty and where the sub objectives, this is what's really going to tie into the details of some of your work. And so there are multiple sub objectives for each objective. And this is what, like I said, it tiers down. These are written in a way, there's some nuance into how these are written, and I wanted to really take some time to explain that. So they're SMART objectives, meaning they're specific, measurable, achievable, results-oriented, and time-limited. However, the SMART objective part of this is really tiered more towards our implementation monitoring, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And then, so it's tiered into the implementation monitoring, but the effectiveness monitoring part is identified through the various groups, which again, I'm going to explain here in just a minute. Okay, that's the end of that slide. Okay, now jumping back to big picture, wanted to go over the overall monitoring framework. So this is for how we're going to monitor the HCP as a whole, so holistically. So it's a 2-tiered approach. We have implementation monitoring, and then we have effectiveness monitoring. The implementation monitoring is basically looking at, are we implementing the HCP conservation measures on the ground as intended to be implemented? And so this is looking at, are we doing what we say we're going to do in the HCP? And that tears down, you know, our operators doing what they say they're going to do. Are our operators following the regulations as intended? So that's one piece. And then the effectiveness monitoring is the other piece. And that's where we get into the more of the science of so essentially, once you consider implementation, are we achieving, so are the strategies, which are essentially the rule changes, are we achieving the intended outcome? So the minimizing sediment, cool, clean water, complex habitats, are we actually achieving that on the ground? That's what the effectiveness monitoring is. So the implementation monitoring part, I'm not going to talk a lot about it here. That's going to be conducted through ODF's programs, the compliance monitoring program, and then also through we're going to be tracking statistics for enforcement, on the ground enforcement, and that's going to inform the implementation. However, when I talk about the groups here in a second, there's one key component here. So all of those BGOs and those SMART sub-objectives will be addressed through the implementation monitoring as a whole. That information is then used to inform effectiveness monitoring. And so there's two pieces of this. One is that there's an inherent assumption that in order for those strategies to be effective, they have to be implemented correctly. And so we need to look at, that's why we're looking at all of them for implementation. There's another part, however, there's a certain subset of those sub-objectives that are only identified for implementation monitoring. We call those group 1 only sub-objectives. Those essentially they're not identified for additional effectiveness monitoring. There's an inherent assumption that those particular objectives and those strategies that relate to those objectives are built on robust science, and therefore there's an assumption that they will be effective. So just wanted to mention that because it gets a bit confusing. Looking at my notes here. And then, so that's the implementation monitoring. And then the effectiveness monitoring also has two components. And so that's going to be the status and trend monitoring, and then the effectiveness monitoring targeted studies. And so there's two separate components there because there's really two different things that we need to track. And those are also related somewhat to the amount of science or gaps in knowledge between, what we know and what we need to know. Let me go on to the next one, and then we might want to come back to that. Okay, so in the document for the BGOs, and then it's also pretty well described in chapter 6, there are these 4 categories of monitoring. So as I mentioned, the group 1, all of those biological goals and objectives and the sub-objectives will be addressed through the group 1. So they all will receive some level of implementation monitoring. Some of those sub-objectives you'll see, it'll say group 2, status and trend monitoring. Those are targeted for status and trend monitoring. The next group is the targeted monitoring studies. And those are basically the sub-objectives that relate to the conservation measures where there's gaps in the literature. And so there's a need to identify or to conduct these targeted monitoring studies to fill some gaps in our knowledge and to really take a more refined, focused look at the effectiveness of those particular measures. And then the last group is an interesting one. Is targeted monitoring studies. However, they're specifically those that relate to these triggering events. And so, for example, the steep slope strategies, right? Those sediment retention areas, those are intended to both reduce the risk of landslides, but also when they do fail, those areas fail to deliver wood and sediment downstream into fish streams. And so you can't really study those, until you have an event, or at least that's probably when they're best studied. And so for those are identified in a separate category because it's really going to take a very different kind of methodology to figure out how we're going to track effectiveness of those measures that basically are so closely tied to these events that are episodic on the landscape. And so it's mainly the steep slope strategy. And then also I believe there's some group 4 BGOs that relate to the road disconnection question. All right, one more slide. So here's, I just pulled these together just as examples for what a group 1, 2, 3, and 4 looks like out of the BGO the BGO portion of the document. Where you see in this first one, the 1.1, it says group 1 implementation monitoring. This is one of those ones that's a group 1 only. And so this one relates to no harvest RMAs and their ability to minimize sediment delivery to streams. And so we are, based on the science that built or went behind those RMAs, there's an inherent assumption that they will be effective at minimizing sediment delivery to fish streams, as well as those portions of the NP streams that have those no harvest RMAs. So that only gets implementation monitoring. The next one down is the group 2 status and trend. And this is one where we're talking about those same no harvest RMAs maintaining shade to support stream temperature needs for those covered fish species. And so again, that's one that there's quite a robust body of science behind shade and stream temperature and the needs of fish. But however, there's some gaps. So those are identified for the group 2. So it says group 1, but that also says group 2. So that's that one. The third one is, I believe it's an amphibian one. Did I pull out an amphibian one? Yes. So 3.3, this would be the targeted type of study. This one is also related to shade to support stream temperature needs of covered amphibians. It's looking specifically at those portions of the perennial stream network that are above the no harvest RMAs. So they get RELZs. So those are the RMAs that just have the non-merch trees and the shrub cover. And so this one is identified for a group 3 type of study because this is something that basically is a brand new strategy being implemented, and there's really not information to indicate, the level of effectiveness. And so, or at least there's some significant gaps in the knowledge is what I should say. So that's a group 3. And then this last one is the targeted monitoring. And that's the example I spoke to just a minute ago about the SRAs, slope retention areas. Sorry, I always call them sediment retention areas. Those would require that targeted monitoring type of work. So again, the point of my presentation today is just to give you guys a high level overview of the structure. And I'm going to pause here for questions and I'll stop sharing. We can come back and I can share my screen if needed. I'm sure that there's lots of questions. The other thing I wanted to mention, I should have said this at the beginning, but the document in front of you, what you have is a portion of the conservation strategy chapter, which is chapter 4, and that's the BGO piece. So you only have a subset of that chapter. And then you have the adaptive management and monitoring chapter in its entirety. So I will pause there. That was a really high level, very fast overview. The intent is that I'll come back in April and we'll have a much longer opportunity for deep discussion with both AMPC and IRST. I just wanted to provide some basis background behind that document that was shared out.
That was perfect, Jennifer. Thank you
Great.
for rolling through that. That really was exactly, I think, what we had in mind in setting
Great.
this discussion up today. And so I really appreciate it. The point here is just to give an opportunity for you all to put what you have in front of you in context a little bit, answer some of the questions you might have from the sort of outset. And then the intent is for you all now to, on your own time, take a deeper dive in this document that's been shared and really start to read through it, visualize. There's a lot in here that I think we're gonna obviously have to wrestle with in planning our monitoring strategy and plan for moving forward. And as you're now seeing in this document, this really will color the way that we approach effectiveness monitoring and some of the trends monitoring that we need to do, sort of the status and trends to make sure that we're trending in the direction, because in some cases that is the goal is to trend right in the positive direction, and other pieces of it lend more towards different types of studies. But all of it is going to be things that we now that are now in our squarely in our realm, and we won't be able to answer all of that today. Today's meeting was just really to kick it off and give you guys some structure so you can take some time to think about that, and then we will have a more full, robust discussion together with the IRST, who also is seeing this, many of them for the first time, and starting to wrestle with what it means. And then we'll have a group discussion at the April meeting and go from there. Terry.
Yeah, I just want to sort of confirm that the work to date in terms of the initial research questions, scoping proposals, and the RFPs that are about to go out are all in alignment with this information Jennifer just pointed out. So we've started down the road, and it's coming together in a more comprehensive way, I guess you could say.
Yeah, if I can just add in chapter 6, those initial questions are very clearly identified. And, you can probably go through these BGO list and, kind of find those ones that so essentially the work you guys are doing is already giving us a head start on this, tackling the giant question of how we're going to address all of these BGOs and get them monitored over time. So there's already a bunch of work underway that's going to inform this.
Dave.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was a great job as usual. And what I was thinking, is it possible sometime in the future to take, I mean, we have different things going on simultaneously. And I've been asked from time to time to give updates on the AMC as well as this whole PFA evolution here. And it would be helpful to have like just a simple 1-page, 2-page max overview that could be presented, for example, to the OSWA membership and our newsletters and whatnot to help describe what's happening here with the HCP as well as the AMC. So this would be a multi-pronged effort, but I think it'd be important to help explain to the common person what's going on in simplified language, just so that they know. Ultimately, they're the ones that are going to help pay for all this, and so it'd be nice for them to understand what's going on. So if there's something that could be developed in the next several months, would be great if that's possible.
Yeah, I believe we're already working on a updated 1-pager for the HCP to share out. And Terry, maybe you and I can talk together about pulling together something for AMC.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
That is a good idea, Dave. Maybe that's something that I know Wendy, are you still chairing the Committee for Family Forestry?
I am, but Dave's taking over in June because I'm terming
Perfect.
off. Yeah.
That seems like a thing that committee could help, really help kind of take a charge on, because I agree with you. I think that would be useful. And not only just for information, and that those folks will help pay for it in different manners, but also it'll largely be on their land, right? That some of these things are going to be monitored, and so it'd be helpful to have something to communicate to them, why it's being monitored, and that it's a part of a bigger picture, a bigger story.
It could help solicit, like you say, participants, and then if particularly the road study that we've been talking about. So, yeah, anything that we could help to get folks involved would be helpful, I think.
Yep.
Any other questions or initial thoughts, Sean?
Just a comment that it looks like from Jennifer's presentation that some of those BGO sub-objectives may influence our amphibians question 3 topics, especially.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're going to find as you dig into this, all of the IRST and AMC members are going to find that some of the things that we've already been sort of talking about are addressed in these, and it even sort of talks about how, in terms of the tier, how those are going to be monitored, and so I do think it'll be really important. Which is why Stacy and I thought, we wanted to get this in front of this group as soon as we could, knowing that this draft now is a public draft. And I use that word with a sort of quotations, because it's not on anybody's website or anything, but it has been officially submitted to the federal services, as the draft, that's for them to consider and start to move that permitting process forward. That said, it is still a draft, right? And so we're waiting feedback and discussion with the feds, NOAA Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so there definitely could be, and will be for sure, some changes to that full document. I don't know. We don't know to what extent there'll be discussion about these particular elements specifically. I would hope that that most of this stays fairly, and I would think it probably will stay fairly close to what we've got there. But it is just a reminder that it is still draft. Jason.
No, thanks for that, Seth. On that note, do we have any indication in some of the pre-consultation discussions with the services on any substantive changes or things that might be coming, or are we at this point in time we're just waiting to see what the review looks like? I'm just curious if there's been any precursor to the actual review of the draft.
Maybe I'll kick some of that to Jennifer. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. Yeah, so essentially where we're at is we originally submitted a prior draft to the services back in July of 24. And we got a list of substantial questions and concerns from them at that point. And so we've done our best effort to revise the document to address all of those questions. And so the version that just was submitted to them is, we're considering it like we've already addressed most of their questions, and we're waiting to see what they say now. So essentially I would consider it kind of a fresh start, in that we've submitted it. We don't know what they're going to say at this point. And we're hoping, and I believe that for most of the original concerns, that we've addressed them adequately, but we don't really know until we hear from them. Does that help?
Yeah, Stacy.
Yeah, just to add to that, and Jennifer and Seth can correct me, but I think where we are in the process is sort of this final application, still a draft, but should be really close, with the intention of the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA reviewing, finding it complete, and then kind of starting you know, depending on, there may be some more back and forth between the state and the services, finding it's complete and then submitting a notice of intent, which would then kind of start the NEPA clock and
Right.
process and kind of kick us into the federal environmental review. So my understanding is that's sort of the point we're in, where this should be pretty close. There may be some tweaks and changes and a little bit of back and forth, but we're kind of moving into a new phase for the next step.
That's our hope, Stacy. That's where we're at.
Yes.
And, you know, it's really gonna hinge on whether the services, kind of how they view whether we've addressed their initial comments adequately or not. And we won't know that till we hear back from them.
Any other questions or thoughts? Okay. Well, please dig into this. Find some time in the next month to really read through it with a highlighter, highlighting areas that you have questions with, or things that you think connect here or there, or to other pieces that we've talked about. And that'll really help facilitate as you come with your questions and thoughts to that meeting in April. Sharing those questions and thoughts will help everybody kind of get on on a better footing, and hopefully lead us into that discussion where we'll begin to develop our monitoring plan moving forward. And that really is, and wrapping this back to the budget discussion that we just had, this is going to cost money, and time is important, right? And we're trying to communicate that to the legislature as well, that we need a lot of this monitoring. It will behoove us to start monitoring early rather than late, which means we need that funding as soon as possible so that we can start to sort of set baselines and really sort of gather that status and trend from the beginning as much as possible. So happy reading. So that, I think, takes us to the end of our the substance of our meeting today.
Yep.
I don't know, Terry, if there's any other wrap up stuff we needed to go over.
Nope. I'm ready to adjourn the meeting.
Any final thoughts or questions from AMC members before we give a few minutes back on your Wednesday? All right, Jason, since you had to step away, just so you know, we did end up prioritizing it was a unanimous vote. Sorry we missed you, but prioritizing that the East Side Slopes question to go ahead and move forward, given the budget issues, prioritize that one first, and then continue to move forward with the roads, but keep an eye to the legislature. So.
Great. Thanks, Seth. And I support that as well, just for the record.
Excellent.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Terry, I think that's it. I think we're good to adjourn. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.